Americans want government to protect us from foreign enemies and from people in America who might hurt us physically or financially. So politicians pass laws that claim to do that. And then, because they can't keep up with the constant changes in life, they create whole agencies to write and enforce additional regulations. This is the result. 160,000 pages of rules. Some contradict each other. No one understands all of them, and yet bureaucrats keep adding more. Thousands of new pages every month. The regulations might be worth it if they really make us safer, but they don't. Cliff Asness has grown an investment management fund from $1 billion to $50 billion. So I assume this means you're smart,
No.
But explain why then you say that these financial regulations meant to protect the poor investors who got hurt after the bubble burst do more harm than good.
Well, first, let's step back. I don't think that a zero regulation world is right. There's some. I'm a fan of thou shalt not kill. That's pretty good.
We all agree that the Constitution's good.
Yeah.
You can't kill, you can't rob.
And classical economics recognizes the need for some regulation. I won't do an economics lecture, but things like externalities, they're called, tragedies of the common, free rider problems, do call for some regulation. The problem is when you take a politician, particularly a progressive politician, and teach them these words. They tend to see an externality everywhere. They tend to see these things everywhere. A lot of that has to do with their own incentives. To become a more famous politician, you don't get more famous by saying, actually, everything's fine. You get more famous by passing a bill with your name on it.
And let's just back up, because you're talking about externalities. One is pollution, for example.
Pollution is a classic example.
My factory pollutes your lungs, goes to many states. The regulation is reasonable against that.
To some degree, and depending on the situation. I have an even simpler example of an externality, speed limits. If you were, you might think a libertarian will be against speed limits because how dare you tell me what to drive? I am a libertarian. Are you a libertarian?
Yes.
Yes. You might think a libertarian will be against speed limits because who the heck should tell me how fast to drive? But when you drive too fast, and too fast can be arguable, you impose a cost of safety on other people. You're not just on yourself. Libertarians generally would be far less for or even against seatbelt laws or helmet laws because those are costs you impose upon yourself. So some regulations needed, but when politicians are given an open checkbook and the incentive to get famous, and even, let's give them some credit, even wanting to do good, even wanting to help people, it gets insane, as you've shown, very, very rapidly. And what's worse, often doesn't even actually make us safer.
All right, financial regulations.
Well,
first we had Enron, the scam, and they passed, Congress said, we're going to fix this. They passed Sarbanes-Oxley, page after page of rules. President Bush said this is going to just fix everything. It didn't stop the current bubble, didn't stop Bernie Madoff. Now it's Dodd-Frank. They say that's going to fix things.
Well, there are things that sadly will never fix. Intentional financial fraud is very hard to catch. That's usually more a matter of prosecution than fixing. Yet we hold out the dream. And let me give you an example where Dodd-Frank and trying to regulate us all to perfect safety actually makes us less safe. Bernie Madoff was registered with the SEC. Part of Dodd-Frank's reforms are to make vastly larger numbers of money managers register with the SEC. The SEC is well-meaning. The people who do these inspections and they're trying to find fraud, they're competent people. But intentional fraud, is very difficult to find. These are smart people trying to fool them. And it's very difficult to check every company. So when you go out there and say, all right, everyone's registered, the small guy naturally assumes,
I'm safe. Government's protecting
Exactly.
me.
So not only are these things tremendously inefficient and a tremendous burden, not always, but often, they actually do the precise opposite of what they're supposed to do. Dodd-Frank does it all over the place. Dodd-Frank claims to end too big to fail. The idea that we'll bail out companies that are really important to the economy. I've read annoyingly large amounts of the bill. I have yet to find where they end it. In fact, I think they instantiate it forever. They declare some institutions systemically important. That's kind of a phrase they made up.
Sounds like too big to fail.
And they kind of promise these things won't fail. That's bad in two ways. It's bad for the classic way because they gamble with other people's money because they'll be bailed out. But imagine they do fail. Imagine the unthinkable happens. How much worse is it to have a company fail that everyone knew might fail than it is to have a company fail that the government kind of said, we got your back? It's incredibly worse to have a company fail where we were told it's all going to be okay, the government got it covered. So very often in trying to stop these things, they actually induce a lot more risk into the system. So regulation stinks because it makes us inefficient, but it also stinks because it often gets it backwards.
One conceit of the regulators is that this group can spot the next bubble and pull the plug before it happens.
If they could, they should be really doing my job. We try to make our money from a lot of little things by pricing things a little bit better. We find that incredibly hard. So maybe this is just ego speaking, but I have a lot of trouble thinking that 8 bureaucrats in a room are going to predict the next bubble. And by the way, predicting the next bubble has a cost when you're wrong, because you cut off a lot of growth and innovation. If you sit there and you too often and you say it's a bubble we need to stop, you stop the economy from growing. So the idea that these guys, Alan Greenspan tried it. If you remember in 1996, he called it irrational exuberance 3-4 years before the tech bubble. And he eventually changed his mind pretty much at the exact wrong moment by the end of the tech bubble. This has been tried and
he's
failed.
Probably smarter than most of these regulators.
I would certainly bet on him ahead of the rest of them, and I wouldn't bet a nickel on him getting it right next time either.
So the market just sorts it out, and some people lose vast sums of money?
First, yeah. The market does sort it out. Markets are not perfect. They make errors. They are far better than committees of bureaucrats. Second, I think if government stopped monkeying with markets, we'd have a lot fewer